Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you may be. My name is Leor Student, and I've had a chance to work with some of you towards your presentation. And in the next few minutes, you will get some crystal clear information about what needs to go into a grabbing opening and into a memorable closing that encourages action. So let's get started. Many people are unaware that in a presentation or a conversation, a talk, the prime time for audience attention is the opening and the closing. So whether it's 5 to 15% of the entire talk, the opening, or 5 to 15% the closing of the entire talk, that's the time that the audience really listens up. From the time you open your mouth and they're just not sure what's going to happen, and there's this psychological advantage that you don't want to waste, to the time that you say, and finally, to sum up, to conclude. And that really is like a red flag that you're holding, and the audience finally wakes up and says, okay, if I wasn't listening until now, now is a good time to listen. So this is the prime time, and you want to use it well. Regarding the opening, what you have here are two components that you must always use no matter what. So you never want to go straight into your topic, but rather you want to have a grabber, an attention grabber to catch the audience attention. I like to think of it a little like a mental handshake, and it can be really quick. It can be a question you ask your audience, for example, who hasn't had coffee here yet? Or raise your cup of coffee to make sure you're all awake. It can be an anecdote related to the topic. It can be a quote, a fact, a startling statistic, like 14 million people are sitting at home right now waiting for, and only then say, good morning, my name is da-da-da-da-da, and today you will, and then introduce your topic. It can be a quote by someone. It can be something personal. For example, I've been with a company for 3 years, and I'm surprised every time by something. Or the one thing that I'm excited by is that something. So you want to find your grabber, whether it's personal or whether it's related to the topic or both, and whether it's a question, and only then get started and dive in. And the way to dive in is with a promo. Give us a reason to listen. And that goes into giving us the agenda and maybe even the messages ahead of starting to talk about them, so they get the bottom line first. I'm a big fan of that. You want to answer the so what for them. Why should they listen? So never, ever say, I'm going to talk about, or I will share with you. But instead, start with you. Today, you will hear, you will understand, you'll discover, you'll be surprised to find out. Or when you leave today, you will know what. I like to think of it as questions that they'll get answers to. So today you'll get answers to the 3 questions you've all been asking yourselves. And that's why I'm a big fan of the question-based agenda. So introducing topics instead of problem, solution, current status, next steps, roadmap, boring. Instead, turn them into questions. What's the roadmap for 2022 is a lot more interesting. Problem, okay? How are we solving this and this? So turn everything into a question. And if you can turn it into a question the way the audience thinks of it in the back of their heads, then it shows them that you are focused on what is of interest to them. So I'm a big fan of question-based agenda. And as I said, sometimes you can even give the message in the agenda, or at least a promo of the message, so they know what's coming up and they're eager to listen. And some key opening phrases can be, today you'll become experts on, in the next hour you'll discover, our goal today, right? A shared goal, or I will challenge you, okay? Get ready. So any of these are relevant. But when we look at how this will sound when we talk about a question-based agenda, take a look at what these questions may sound like.
So what is the big change? What is the biggest change of our time?
So the question is, how are we going to fix this? How do we change these numbers at the top? How do we make this different?
What has physics done for me lately? I mean, do I get better color television? Do I get better internet reception with physics?
So these are some questions for a question-based agenda that make it more interesting for the audience to keep on listening. Now let's look at the closing, the mirror, the other side of the opening. So there's a conversation between the opening and the closing. So if you told the audience that they will see something or hear something or learn something, at the end, you're doing a review and you're telling them, you're repeating what they've learned, the key takeaways, we call them, the bottom line messages. You've seen, you've heard, you now understand, okay? You now have answers to these questions, and then you actually deliver those messages. And sometimes, you may have a key takeaway slide that looks similar to the agenda slide with the key takeaways, never more than 4. 3 is an ideal number. And if we go to the closing, then it's not enough just to give them the key takeaways. And yes, if you were repeating them earlier, don't hesitate to repeat them again. People always ask me, oh, but they've heard them. Should we repeat them? Yes, repeat them, because people tune in and out. You don't want to miss this opportunity. But then you can't just leave and say, thank you. You have to really ask yourself, what do I want them to do with these key takeaways, with these messages I've shared with them? And no one just stands there to inform. Otherwise, send me an email. But if you're there, if you're presenting, you want to move the audience from point A to point B and beyond. And this beyond is the call to action. What do you want to happen as a result of you speaking? And if you don't ask for it, it's just not going to happen. So you're going to ask, I invite, I urge, I suggest, I recommend, right? All of these are ways to start your call to action. And you have to have a real clear call to action that adheres to 3 criteria, which is why do it, give them a reason, how and what to do, really specific, otherwise they won't act on it. Can't be, let's move forward. How? And then when to do it. So you have to be really clear about the when, otherwise they'll push it off forever. And a call to action should really have its own slide. I think it should be instead of the thank you slide personally. Useless, thank you, generic. So any questions and thank you, replace it with a call to action slide that looks somewhat like this. So the why you can say out loud if you want to, or in order to, or to achieve something. You say that out loud, but on the slide, give them the what to do, how to do it, real steps, not action items, but what they should do next. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. And then the when is not just a date, which is great, but it can be next quarter, before the end of the year. It can be before your competitors are the first to do it. It can be after you complete a certain step. So you can be flexible in terms of the when, but it has to be a real when. Now, in terms of calls to action, when we look at the what and how to do, it doesn't have to be a real action in terms of physically doing something. It can be an action that is think about, consider, ask yourselves, challenge yourselves. That sometimes is a call to action, but it still moves the audience. Ask yourselves these 2 questions before the end of the year. Okay? Another way to look at a call to action slide and ask for what you want is this. Take a look at the different sample calls to action. You can prepare an alternative for your current processes. You can identify 2 areas for improvement. You can try the product for a month and then come back to us with feedback. You can define short-term or long-term needs in order to start working on them. You can choose from these 4 options on the slide. You can decide how to move forward or make a decision together as a group. These are sample calls to action. So feel free to craft your own or use any of these, but really never leave a presentation or a talk or conversation without a call to action. Think about what you wanted to do, and just to inform is never the answer. So when we look at the closing, we always have, the closing phrases. And the closing phrases may be, I want to leave you with a thought, or the bottom line is, or remember that, right? And then the call to action. And people ask me often about the thank yous and the any questions. So a thank you is great if it's not generic, okay? So thank you for putting your trust in me when it comes to these presentations. But you want to really think about a thank you that is a little differentiated. You don't want to be generic. And when you invite questions, I hear too often, any questions? Like, oh, thank God it's over and just leave me alone. Instead, you want to be really welcoming and say, I know I've given you a lot to think about. So whether you want to ask about section this, or section this, or if you want to voice some of your concerns, now is the time. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have. We have the next 15 minutes to do just that. So feel free. I know it's always hard to be the first one. So that's the opening and the closing. A mirror of each other, prime time for audience attention and retention. And you want to make sure you've got these 4 components, 2 in each side, to have grabbing opening and memorable closings.